Hey everybody, how's it going? Hopefully y'all are having a great day. In today's video, I wanted to cover a couple of events that happened to me recently that coincided perfectly with something that I had recently read. I think that if most people grasp this concept, it's going to cut down on the amount of reactionary fights that they have in all of their relationships, I think, on a day-to-day basis. So first things first, I want to explain the parties involved with the events, explain the events themselves, read the excerpt from the book, and then kind of explain the interplay and how I like to apply it with my own life. So first things first, let's establish the parties. We have, let's say, person A and person Z. Both person A and person Z grew up in a abusive household. Both of them have trouble with dealing with disrespect. Both of them get very emotional very quickly. And when the stage is right, they can kind of become purely based on reaction, right? A lot of their actions are dictated based on their emotions. So A and Z had a fantastic afternoon. They were getting along great. They were singing, they were dancing, they were having a good time. And then A tells Z, hey, I'm going to be doing this one thing, by the way. And Z takes a quick pause. There's a noticeable change in the atmosphere, and Z says, well, make sure before you do that, you tell me first. Now, A interpreted this as a very shocking change. All of a sudden, we weren't singing and dancing anymore. All of a sudden, Z is trying to control A. So A lashes back out and says, well, I'll do what I want. I don't need to text you or tell you about anything, right? And then starts the conflict, where A is reacting to Z's suddenly out of nowhere controlling behavior, and Z is reacting to A's lack of willingness to let them know what's going on, right? So in this situation, we can see that both A and Z have now become really emotionally charged and are purely speaking off of their emotions. So with that being said, I would like to read the excerpt from the book here. So it says, be aware of inflaming factors. And it talks about low-grade and high-grade emotions. Now, low-grade emotions, they just kind of sit in the background. They continually process and, they affect our thinking, right? But high-grade emotions, however, they come at certain moments, and they really are explosive in pitch and generally sparked by something external, right? It's not usually something within yourself. It's usually an external stimulus. In this case, Z all of a sudden shifting and trying to control A, and A taking that very disrespectfully and lashing out at Z. How dare you try and control me, right? So this comes, and this specifically, right? I think that there are a multitude of different things, but I think childhood trauma, at least for this generation, seems to be a very common theme. But it says, quote, the way to recognize the high grade emotion and the reaction to it, right? The way to recognize this in yourself and in others is by noticing behavior that is suddenly childish in its intensity and seemingly out of character. These could center on any key emotions. It could be fear, sudden illness, love, extreme mistrust. This often triggers a sudden rebellious attitude. Now, this comes from The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. And I thought that's so incredible to know. That the way to recognize high-grade emotions is noticing behavior that is suddenly childish in its intensity and seemingly out of character. Now, using this excerpt, we can start to analyze the interaction between A and Z, right? A and Z were having a good time, they were dancing, singing, and now all of a sudden, Z exhibits some childish, very suddenly childish intensity, and it's really kind of out of character. I mean, they were having a great time, And then that prompts A to also kind of act suddenly childish in intensity and seemingly out of character, right? So this scenario, I think, is very good from the vantage point of explaining this with if we look through A's lens, right? Now, A had an opportunity for both offense and defense here using this concept, right? In the offensive side, where you're kind of handling outside emotions, right? You're dancing, you're singing, all of a sudden Z tries to control. Now A should realize, oh wow, that was suddenly childish in intensity and seemingly out of character. This might be a high-grade emotion that I'm dealing with here. So rather than fight back, saying something simple like, while I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, I'm more than happy to, let you know, inform you, keep you apprised on what I'm doing. But, I would like to discuss that later, but let's continue to have fun for the afternoon, right? And just de-escalate the situation. Try your best to relocate the conversation to a less emotionally charged situation or time and place, and just agree, right? Now at that time, whenever time comes to discuss, I think that there's another video down the road that I'll make that talks about how to kind of have a crucial conversation. But for the immediate point, it's more of the recognition that a high-grade emotion could be at play here that stems from childhood trauma, right? Now, that was the offensive side, right? So A could have just stopped there and been like, hey, I acknowledge this. Let's talk about it later. I'm more than happy to comply, but let's continue to have a good time, right? And just enjoy the rest of the afternoon and discuss it when things are a little bit less emotionally charged. Now, the defensive could have been, okay, A did not catch that it was suddenly childish in intensity and seemingly out of character. They didn't catch that. So then they react. They say, well, I'll do what I want. Why are you going to control me? Boom. Right there, A has the opportunity to self-reflect and say, whoa, I have now exhibited, although it was reactionary, that is valid, but the fact still stands that A has now exhibited behavior that is childish in its intensity and seemingly out of character, right? So A has the opportunity to react and then say, whoa. This is not how I want to be, continuing this conversation. Take a step back and say, you know what? I'm sorry. That was a pretty rushed reaction by me. I would like to talk about this later, but I'm very happy to, keep you apprised, do whatever. Let's continue. Have a good night, right? Very easy to do. Well, not easy to do, but like an easy portrayal. Very hard to recognize in yourself without adequate practice, right? But that presents both an offensive side and a defensive side on how to use this idea, right? Now, the way I would explain this is humans have really two centers of processing thoughts, right? We have the prefrontal cortex, which has been a recent development in our evolutionary progress, where we can actually think logically. We have emotions. We have a more complex way of processing thoughts and ideas, right? And that happens in the prefrontal cortex, right? Now, numerous different books cite that you can only really stay there for like logical thought, but once you start resorting to reactions, to emotions, to really like no longer processing thoughts, right? You resort back to the limbic system, right? And the limbic system is a very rudimentary, very reactionary part of the brain. So the way I've described it to A is saying, this is very similar to like trying to stay asleep or trying to stay awake when you're on a long drive, right? If you're on a drive and you start to kind of doze off a little bit, you do whatever you can to stay awake, right? You roll down the window so that cold air blasts you in the face. You crank up the music, you try and dance, you sing, you slap yourself a little bit. Do whatever you can to maintain consciousness, right? So that you can drive safely, right? Maybe find a rest stop, pull over, then you take a nap, right? I would say you should treat it with the same intensity of trying to stay awake as trying to keep all of your thoughts in the prefrontal cortex. As best you can, try not to play the game of talking with your emotions, right? Do your best to be logical. Do your best to understand when you have a high-grade emotion and when it's potentially coming out. And if you notice that, do everything you can to avoid that resorting back to the limbic system, because once you go there, it's very hard to snap out of it and kind of bring yourself back to thinking with the prefrontal cortex. So that's how I would explain that situation in the context of A and B. Now, some real world application, not just hindsight being 2020, but being able to actually apply this. Me and my significant other the other night had a conversation, and we, very similar to A and Z, were having a great, like, fine time talking. We had actually got done playing a lot of Animal Crossing, right? So we were kind of out and about and talking, and, I brought up the topic of, when they're ready, building a PC, starting to enter the world of PC gaming and join a Discord server with my friends, right? And she's no stranger to my friends. She's, hung out with them several times in the past, but for some reason she seemed a little bit apprehensive, right? I don't know, I'm so far behind on like PC gaming, and what if I'm not good enough? I don't know that they'll like playing with me. So I realized that there was, at first I didn't understand, right? I kept trying to prescribe more things, right? Don't worry about that. You'll be fine. You don't need to worry about being good, or, oh, they really enjoy having you around, right? I'm prescribing her the wrong medicine, right? Like, I'm not fully listening and understanding what's going on deep inside, right? So I'm throwing all these remedies at her that aren't going to work, right? So then I realized, like, oh, wait. This does not sound logical from like all the things that I know of her, right? She's definitely hung out with my friends before. We've all played video games in the past. So why the hesitancy now, right? And I noticed that there was behavior that was suddenly childish in its intensity and seemingly out of character. So then I took a step back and I said, okay, rather than keep talking at her or like trying to prescribe things, I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna just ask. Oh, okay. That's totally fair. You definitely haven't had the long experience playing video games that we have had, as far as PC gaming is concerned. Why do you think that's like such an important thing to you, or why do you think that's such a barrier for you? Let them talk, kind of say, oh well, this and that. And I say, oh, that's like interesting. So you feel like this and that, right? So kind of restating their point, and once you get their buy-in, that they say, yeah, that's exactly it. I know that I'm tracking well, right? If you haven't already, Dr. K has a fantastic guide on conversations. It's a 2-hour video. It's very long, but I highly recommend you watch that video. If not, you can also read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There is a section on listening that I think is very good, but I think Dr. K's video is probably a little bit more expansive on the topic, and really like narrows down on that. But basically, we just had a conversation where I was just trying to listen to her, right? I was just trying to understand where she's coming from, and got to the root cause that prior in another relationship, she had been hanging out with the significant other for an extended period of time, and the friends had not really kind of expressed to her directly that they wanted to kind of break off and hang out separately. So they were kind of like inconveniencing, or they were kind of felt inconvenienced by her, right? Which, I mean, to me, I don't understand, right? Like, I don't know. I think they're awesome. I think my significant other is awesome. I love hanging out with them, right? But the case stands that the people at the time were not appreciative of her being around, but they didn't have the courage to say it to her, right? Or they didn't have the courage to just simply ask, right? And that created this this fear that if a group of people that she is hanging out with don't necessarily want to hang out anymore, they don't want to play games anymore, and they don't tell her, like, that's going to be like a reignition of that event, right? So then I was like, wow, okay, so now it's not just like she doesn't want to play video games with me or my friends. It's like there's a very real fear that we're not going to want to play games with her, but we're not going to have the courage to tell her, right? So I was like, wow, that's deep, and I would have never got there if I didn't understand that, hey, behavior is like suddenly childish in intensity and seemingly out of character, right? So then we had a real heart-to-heart moment there, talked it through, hugged it out, and it was a good conversation after that. But I don't think that I would have been able to get there had I not read this simple thing of the way to recognize it in yourself and others is when you notice childish or behavior that is seemingly childish in its intensity and seemingly out of character, right? It's a mouthful, trust me, but you'll get it down, right? So hopefully this helps. Again, this isn't really a video on how to have the conversation. I think that there are other valuable resources out there, like Dr. K's video on conversations, as well. I can make a video in the future if you want to hear it from me. But this is more of a video on how to recognize when high grade emotions are at play and kind of serve as a warning on, hey, this is very present, very real. Let's take a step back and not resort back to conversing with the limbic system. And let's try our best to stay awake like you're trying to stay awake on the road. Let's try and stay with the thoughts in the prefrontal cortex and have a logical and, evolutionarily beneficial conversation, right? Or utilization of our evolution, whatever the case is. Have a good conversation with your prefrontal cortex. Try your best not to resort to the limbic system is what I'm trying to say. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you are able to use this in your day-to-day life and you have an example, I would love to hear it in the comment section. If you have any questions, also feel free to put it in the comment section as well, and I'll be happy to reply to them. So without anything else to say, I hope you all have a wonderful day.